The envelope was thick, expensive cardstock with the Whispering Oaks HOA emblem embossed in gold foil. Felt heavy in my hand, and not just physically. I'd been expecting it, in a way. I just hoped they'd be smarter. I'd chosen this sleepy, tree-lined cul-de-sac for its anonymity. 7 nearly identical houses arranged in a perfect circle, a monument to suburban conformity. It was the last place anyone would look for a man of my means. I was just Leo, the quiet guy in house number 4. I kept to myself. My lawn was impeccably manicured by a service I owned under a different name, and I never caused trouble. My only supposed transgression was my cars. I loved classic cars. A pristine '67 Mustang sat in my driveway. A modest '89 Porsche 911 was in my garage. And once a week, I'd have a different car delivered, a Rolls, a vintage Ferrari, a Bentley to take for a weekend drive. They were all mine from a collection stored off-site. To the HOA, it must have looked like I was running an illegal luxury rental service. I slid my thumb under the flap and pulled out the letter. Dear resident of 4 Oak Circle, it began, before launching into a tirade about aesthetic consistency, vehicular blight, and maintaining community standards. The crux was a new punitive fee structure. For a second car, a $500 monthly storage fee. For any car beyond 2, a $1,500 monthly non-compliance fee. The final line was a masterpiece of HOA arrogance. We trust this will encourage you to rectify this ongoing eyesore. I couldn't help but smile. An eyesore? They were calling a piece of rolling art, a '62 E-Type Jaguar that had been there last Tuesday, an eyesore. I folded the letter neatly and placed it on my mahogany desk. They wanted to play hardball over cars. They had no idea the scale of the game I could play, or that the entire board was already mine. The monthly HOA meeting was held in the sterile, beige-walled community clubhouse, a room that smelled faintly of lemon polish and thinly veiled resentment. I took a seat in the back, observing the ritual. The board was a trio of retirees whose newfound purpose in life was the militant enforcement of pedestrian conformity. Their leader was Barbara Strickland, a woman with a helmet of stiff blonde hair and a perpetual frown, as if she just smelled milk on the verge of turning. She ran the meeting with a tiny wooden gavel, for God's sake, tapping it with self-important precision. They discussed the urgent need to standardize mailbox colors, eggshell, not off-white, and the existential threat posed by a child's pink bicycle left on a lawn for 3 hours. Then came my agenda item. Now, Barbara said, adjusting her glasses and fixing her gaze on me like a sniper acquiring a target. The matter of vehicular overflow at number 4. Mr. Evans, I trust you received our notice. All eyes turned to me. I kept my expression neutral, pleasant even. I did, Barbara. I found it interesting. The fees are non-negotiable, she said crisply, her voice cutting through the air-conditioned silence. The covenants clearly state a limit of 2 personal vehicles per lot. Your constant carousel of machines is a clear and persistent violation. We've had numerous complaints. From whom? I asked mildly. That is confidential, she sniffed, a flush creeping up her neck. Suffice to say, the community agrees. Will you be complying? I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on my knees. What if I told you they are all personal vehicles? That I simply own them? A dismissive titter of laughter ran through the room. Barbara allowed herself a smug, victorious smile. Don't be absurd, Mr. Evans. No one owns a fleet of cars like that. This isn't a used car lot. You will limit the vehicles on your property to 2, or the fees will be levied, starting this month. I saw it then, the truth behind the rules. It wasn't about aesthetics or property values. It was about the challenge to her authority. My nonconformity was a virus in her perfectly ordered world, and she was going to quarantine it with fines. I understand, I said, nodding slowly. You're just doing your job, enforcing the rules. Precisely, she said, her posture relaxing. She thought she'd won. No one is above the covenants. I offered a small, placid smile. Of course not. I'll see what I can do. I stood up and left. The meeting droned on behind me, already moving on to the critical issue of unapproved garden gnomes. They thought the matter was closed. They had no idea it had just begun, and that their president had just declared war on her own landlord. The next morning, I stood at my kitchen window, sipping a cup of exceptionally expensive coffee and watching the suburbia stir to life. A lawn sprinkler hissed on across the street. Barbara Strickland emerged to retrieve her newspaper, shooting a triumphant, proprietary glance toward my silent, two-car driveway. She believed she'd won. She believed the matter was settled. She had no idea the first domino was already tipping. I didn't make the call from my personal phone. I walked into my study, a room designed for comfort but equipped for business, and picked up a secure line that connected directly to my chief financial officer, David. David? It's Leo. I need you to execute Plan Oak. Yes, immediately. Full effect. David, a man of few words and impeccable discretion, simply replied, "Consider it done, sir." Plan Oak was a contingency I'd never seriously thought I'd need. Years ago, after the last market crash, the original developer of Whispering Oaks had found himself drowning in debt. I'd bought that debt for pennies on the dollar through a series of opaque holding companies. When he inevitably defaulted, the entire finished development, every house, every streetlight, every inch of pavement on the cul-de-sac, became mine. I never sold a single property. Instead, I'd become the silent absentee landlord, renting them out through a management company to quiet, vetted tenants who valued the strict, predictable order of an HOA. An order I was now about to weaponize. The first notice arrived at Barbara's door 2 days later. It wasn't on HOA letterhead. It was from Oak Circle Property Management, LLC. It was a standard, impersonal notice of a 10% rent increase, citing vague, current market adjustments, and rising operational costs. The first notice arrived at Barbara's door 2 days later. It wasn't on HOA letterhead. It was from Oak Circle Property Management, LLC. It was a standard, impersonal notice of a 10% rent increase, citing vague, current market adjustments, and rising operational costs. I watched from my window as she pulled it from her mailbox. Her expression shifted from curiosity to sharp annoyance. She crumpled it slightly in her hand, no doubt already mentally drafting a complaint to her useless board about outside forces disrupting her perfect world. She was the force. She just didn't know it yet. The squeeze had begun. The rent increase was merely the opening salvo, a soft economic pressure designed to stir the pot. The next move was far more precise, a surgical strike aimed directly at the queen bee's hive. A week later, another letter from Oak Circle Property Management arrived. This one addressed solely to Barbara Strickland. This notice was different. It cited a recent routine property inspection and listed a series of very specific violations at her rental property. There was a single cracked driveway paver near the garage, a downspout that had come slightly loose from its bracket, and the piece de resistance that brought a genuine smile to my face, an unapproved and non-conforming shade of beige on her front door trim. The letter gave her 72 hours to rectify the issues or face a $500 fine per item. The beautiful, exquisite irony was that these were the exact type of picayune, soul-crushing violations she herself delighted in issuing. I was holding a mirror up to her pettiness, and the reflection was enraging her. I watched from my window as she retrieved the letter. Her body language was a masterclass in escalating fury. The initial confusion as she read, the stiffening of her spine, the way her free hand clenched into a fist at her side. She stormed inside, and moments later, I could almost hear the phantom echo of her shrill voice through the walls as she undoubtedly called the property management company to scream at some helpless customer service representative. I imagined her being placated, put on hold, transferred, and finally told in the most bureaucratic tone possible that the violations were, indeed, valid and must be addressed. The following day, a work crew I'd hired, 3 men who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, showed up at her house. They were loud. Their pickup truck took up 2 coveted guest parking spots. They fired up a concrete saw to replace the single paver, shattering the cul-de-sac's revered quiet hours. They left a pile of dirt and a single greasy wrench on her perfectly edged, emerald green lawn. I saw her watching them from her window, her face a thundercloud of impotent rage. Her eyes then flicked across the circle, landing on my house. I saw the dawning, sickening suspicion in her gaze. A sense that this was not a coincidence, that her nerdy, car-obsessed neighbor was somehow connected to this sudden, targeted tyranny. But the connection was impossible for her to make. How could a tenant possibly be responsible for his own landlord's actions? The trap was perfect. She was caught in the gears of a machine she helped build, and she couldn't even see the operator. The tension in the clubhouse was a physical thing, a thick, suffocating blanket of collective anxiety. Barbara Strickland, sensing her control over the meeting and the neighborhood, slipping away, tried to rally the troops. And we will form a committee to draft a strongly worded letter to this management company, she declared, her voice straining for its former authority. It was a pathetic weapon against a faceless corporate entity. What good will that do? Mr. Henderson from number 2 interjected, his voice tight with real worry. They don't care. They just raised my rent by $200 a month. A chorus of agreement erupted. The fear was palpable, the anger directed at an invisible foe. We have to show a united front, Barbara insisted, banging her ridiculous gavel on the table. The sound was small and hollow, a perfect metaphor for her crumbling power. It was then that I decided the charade had gone on long enough. The lesson needed its final, clarifying stroke. I cleared my throat, a soft sound that nonetheless cut through the noise. The room fell silent, all heads turning to me. They probably expected another plea about my cars. A letter won't be necessary, I said, my voice calm and clear, carrying easily in the quiet room. Barbara sighed in profound exasperation. Mr. Evans, this doesn't concern you. This is about our rents and our homes. It concerns me more than you know, I replied, pushing off from the wall where I'd been leaning. I walked to the front of the room, stopping a few feet from her table. You see, the reason a letter won't work is that you'd be writing it to me. A confused, incredulous silence blanketed the room. Barbara's face was a mask of pure bewilderment. What in heaven's name are you talking about? She snapped, her patience gone. Oak Circle Property Management, I explained, as if discussing a minor technicality, is a subsidiary of a holding company I control. I bought the original developer's debt after the last market crash. He defaulted. I now own the debt, the land, and every single house on this block. All of them. I'm your landlord. The silence was absolute. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Barbara's face underwent a terrifying transformation, the color draining from it so completely she looked like a wax figure. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The rent increases, the violation notices sent to you, Barbara. That was me, I continued, my gaze locking with hers. I was just following your example, enforcing the rules. After all, no one is above the covenants, right? The fallout was instantaneous and utterly silent. For a long moment, no one moved. The revelation hung in the air, a bomb that had detonated without sound, leaving everyone stunned in its aftermath. The looks of shock on my neighbors' faces slowly morphed into a dawning, horrifying comprehension. Then, in a few cases, into something like suppressed, incredulous amusement. They were looking at me, but they were seeing an entirely different person. Barbara Strickland looked like she'd been hollowed out. Her spine, usually so rigid with self-importance, seemed to collapse. She sank slowly into her chair, the wooden gavel clattering from her limp fingers and rolling across the floor. Her entire identity, the power, the control, the respect she commanded as HOA president, was built on a foundation she didn't own. And I had just calmly presented her with the deed, pulling the title out from under her feet in front of the entire community she sought to rule. You can't do that, she finally whispered, her voice a thin, reedy thing, stripped of all its former authority. It was the plea of a deposed monarch who couldn't comprehend the revolution. I already have, I said, my voice gentle but firm, leaving no room for debate. I addressed the room now, turning my gaze from her shattered form to the wide-eyed faces of my tenants. But let's talk about the future. Effective immediately, the HOA is dissolved. There will be no more fees. No more violations for gnomes, mailbox colors, or the height of your grass. A palpable wave of relief washed over the room. Shoulders slumped in release, not defeat. A few people exchanged glances of sheer, unadulterated joy. As for your rents, I continued, they will revert to their previous rates, effective next month. The increases are cancelled. This was met with audible sighs and a few muttered thank gods. The tension broke entirely. I finally turned my attention back to Barbara. As for the original issue of my cars, do you have any further objections? She didn't even look up. She just shook her head slowly, a broken woman completely unable to meet my gaze. The fight had left her utterly. Good, I said. I'm glad we could come to an understanding. This neighborhood was supposed to be a quiet place to live. Let's get back to that. I didn't wait for a response, for gratitude or further questions. I turned and walked out of the clubhouse, leaving them in a silence that was no longer tense, but awed. The reign of King Leo, landlord of the cul-de-sac, had begun, and my first decree was that everyone should just relax. The tyranny of the petty was over. The change on Oak Circle was not just immediate. It was a fundamental shift in the very atmosphere. The constant, low-grade anxiety of HOA oversight vanished, replaced by a palpable sense of collective relief. It was as if the entire cul-de-sac had been holding its breath for years and could finally exhale. People began to truly personalize their homes, not with garish displays, but with small touches of individuality that brought the street to life. The family in number 7 painted their front door a cheerful, defiant sky blue. Mr. Henderson installed a slightly too large, frog-shaped birdbath in his front garden, and no one so much as glanced at it twice. My rotating collection of classic cars, once the source of such ire, became a point of quiet curiosity and even pride for the neighborhood. Kids would ride their bikes past a little slower when a new car appeared, and a few brave ones even asked if they could see the cool cars. I'd sometimes pop the hood of the '67 Mustang, explaining the engine in simple terms, their eyes wide with wonder. Barbara Strickland became a near recluse. She rarely left her house, and when she did, she'd offer a tight, embarrassed smile before hurrying to her car, avoiding any possibility of conversation. The board she had presided over was permanently disbanded. Freed from her micromanagement, the community actually became more neighborly. They organized an impromptu block party that summer. I supplied a massive, professional-grade grill and, much to everyone's delight, arrived driving a brilliantly restored vintage VW van that had been converted into a mobile kitchen, complete with a slushy machine for the kids. I sat in a folding lawn chair, a perfectly grilled burger in hand, watching my tenants, my neighbors, laugh, talk, and play. The sun was warm, the grass was green, in a variety of shades, no longer a regimented monoculture, and the air was filled with the sound of music and children's laughter, not the silent, judgmental weight of the HOA. I owned every house on the block, but for the first time, it truly felt like a home. The power hadn't been about domination. It had been about liberation. I had used my wealth not to impose stricter rules, but to dismantle them, to return a sense of peace and ownership to the people who lived there. And as a cherry-red '63 Corvette Stingray rolled onto the circle for the weekend, gleaming under the streetlights, not a single person complained about the eyesore. They just nodded in quiet appreciation. Peace, at last, looked and sounded exactly like I wanted it to.